With noble Salamander having settled his territories as he got on in age, he launched a final series of conquests to the north, waging war against the Slavs for what would prove to be the rest of his life. In the meanwhile, the rest of the world continued in its shifting ways. In 752, the Tibetan kingdom of Song was making gains against Batavia to the south, bringing its own peculiar brand of Buddhism, Vajrayana, with it. In 756, Lucania launched an invasion of eastern Santonia, which would prove to be an ultimately doomed endeavor. While the Lucanians were masters of infantry formation and naval harassment, they were no match for heavily armored mounted contingents, which effortlessly flanked them and crashed into their formations from all sides. Indeed, the most they got out of their war was a peace treaty. Throughout 757 and 758, the Anglians defiantly crept up the British coast, putting villages to the torch and taking veritable armies of slaves to be sold to buyers across the North Sea. In 800, with the Nogahi distracted by affairs of court, namely the issue of what Sharia-compliant art should look like, the Parthians cleaved a corridor nearly across their entire realm, triggering civil breakdown as nobility squabbled amongst themselves. More on the note of this art issue, two schools predominated at the time. First, that representational art was totally haram, and direct depictions of creation were insults to Allah, as he formed them best. The second school believed that by representing the world in art, the believer could be brought closer to Allah and his creation. This led to violence between the two groups, and with the Nogahi essentially divided against themselves, they were ultimately unable to fend off foreign threats in an effective manner as a result. In March of 763, having conquered many Slavs, Barosarvan Salamander Agarid XVII found himself caught in a drama for the ages. His son, Kandravasu, who was out on a hunting party with various powerful young noblemen from the various clans, including a Turk named Alparslan. They were on the wild steppe, hunting wild boar, and all seemed well. Kandravasu was a friendly and sociable man, and his familiarity with his future subjects was of a nature that endeared him to them. On their way back from the hunt is where the problems began, however. Stopping off in a small Turkic village in the north as the sun was setting, hospitality was shown to the Barosarvan's son and his hunting party. What happened from here has two versions, depending on who is asked. If you ask a Scythian, he'll tell you that, in the midst of drunkenness, a daughter of a Turkic warrior came to serve them drinks, and flung herself lustfully upon Kandravasu's broad shoulder. Kandravasu repelled her advances, and told her that only a fair-haired daughter of the Scythians could share his bed. Alparslan then tried to solicit her, but she turned her face, wet with embarrassed tears, as she fled. If you ask a Turk, however, he'll tell you that when the young lady came, Kandravasu hoisted her over his shoulder and tossed her in a pig pen, loudly proclaiming that only a fair-haired maiden of the Scythians could share his bed. In either case, the stories converge again while Alparslan, consumed either by jealousy or by rage, takes out his knife and slashes Kandravasu across the face. The conflict escalates until Kandravasu and his Scythian compatriots take the lives of the Turks, and when the villagers come to shower the noble Agarid prince with violence, they put the whole village to the torch, too. Turkic peoples across Scythia then rose up in rebellion, and the Turkic rebellion would prove to be Salamander's last war. The Turkic tribes, most powerful in the north and east, sought the help of the Dahe in their war, which they received in the form of fine steeds and hafted arrows. The first battle was the Uzen Massacre, where Salamander, at the head of a huge force, tens of thousands strong, marched to the region in which the incident had first occurred. He tried to broker peace, offering a future where they could remain, if for the price of their autonomy. The Turkics then came spilling out of villages on every side of the valley, and flooded it with braying horses and men driving with rage. Footmen tore each other to shreds in the center, while a great current of cavalry chased another, circling the battle like a great snake eating its own tail. Eventually, the battle was won, but not before Salamander, the 17th of his name, caught an arrow clean through his heart and died instantly, collapsing from his steed into the muddy mire below. As Kandravasu ascended to the throne, he did so with all the rage of his people, and none of his father's sentimental magnanimity. While the Turkic Confederation of Tribes celebrated the prize they had taken, that being the very life of their oppressor's legendary hero king, little did they know that they'd enjoy no further victories from then on out. Kandravasu, wearing the grief of his father's death like a crown, drove the Turkish tribes not only out of the Uzen Valley, but out of Scythia itself. In under 2 years, by 767, the Turkic rebellion was utterly crushed, and the Turks were expelled from Scythia, triggering a diaspora of them in all directions, with the majority of them fleeing south into Parthia and Armenia, creating an unruly minority in those lands which would come to swear eternal enmity against Scythia forever, and taste their desperation for the day of revenge like blood in their mouth. With Barosarvan Kandravasu Agarid having ascended to his father's station, it fell to him to return the realm to peace after the death of his father and the expulsion of the vengeful Turks. This included him personally traveling vast Scythia and burdening himself personally with the work of rebuilding ruined towns. This made him a well-liked man, even if he was haunted by recent events, a fact that showed on his countenance. Meanwhile, by 770, the Turkic tribes were welcomed by the Parthians, who treated their chiefs to positions within the military, and treated their warriors to unruly farmers it was their duty to keep in line. This wasn't the case in Armenia, where they remained just as combative and uncooperative as they had been in Scythia. Indeed, by 771, when Macedon invaded and ultimately conquered the Christian kingdom of Paphlagonia, that break-off in the north that they had been meaning to retake, the Turkic tribes acted of their own accord to help the Macedonians take it, and at no point made any efforts to return the land to Armenia proper. This was received by the Armenian crown as a grievous insult to their empire, and a sign of inherent generational disloyalty. Armenia immediately cast the Turks down to the status of second-class citizens, and persecuted them when and wherever they could, exacting a special tax upon those of them unwise enough to remain in one place, which they called the Turk tax. Indeed, many of them would move on from Armenia as well, moving to Macedonia, where they were also generally unwanted, and Parthia, where they were being groomed as a weapon by powers beyond their control and civilizations far older than theirs. The Turkic diaspora would come to spread across the entire Middle East as a result, influencing Islamic cultures in the south, which were more accepting of them, so long as they converted, while those more practical and business-minded stayed in Parthia. Indeed, Parthia soon became the realm with the highest concentration of Turks outside of Central Asia, and indeed, many others heard the news and heeded the call of their cousins, gradually migrating west. While this wasn't a problem for now, and was indeed being exploited by the Parthians for political and military gain, the mass introduction of a foreign ethnic group to the region would undoubtedly be the root of many problems, and the source of much bloodshed. And so, the die was cast for the rivalry between the Turkic peoples and the Scythians forever, and by extension, deepened the divide between the Scythians and the Parthians, that people who had welcomed the Turks with open arms and saw fit to use their shame, anger, and resentment as a tool to be leveraged against their northern neighbor.